Captain Jessica Miller stood at the panoramic window of the UES Athena's observation deck, watching the distant stars shimmer against the void. Her reflection stared back at her. Steel-gray eyes, auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the distinctive scar that ran along her neck. A permanent reminder of the day she'd nearly died in the Earth-Corax War. "Captain to the bridge." Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice crackled through her comm unit. "Priority 1. Miller was already moving before the message ended. The Athena was Earth's most advanced deep space vessel, equipped with quantum sensors that could detect a coffee cup at 10 light-years. If something had triggered a Priority 1 alert, it wasn't good. The bridge doors hissed open, revealing her crew at their stations, faces illuminated by the soft blue glow of their holographic displays. Her XO, Commander David Chen, stood at the central console, his usual calm demeanor disturbed by what Miller recognized as barely concealed agitation. "Report," Miller ordered, sliding into her command chair. "We've picked up a distress signal, Captain." Chen's fingers danced across the console, bringing up a three-dimensional projection of their sector. "It's coming from grid coordinates 227 Mark 043. Miller leaned forward, studying the projection. "That's beyond the meridian boundary. There shouldn't be any ships out there." "That's not all," Chen continued, his voice tightening. "The signal, it's Coraxian." The bridge fell silent. Miller felt every eye turn to her, waiting for her reaction. The scar on her neck seemed to burn with phantom pain. "Show me," she commanded. The holographic display shifted, revealing a massive vessel, easily 3 times the size of the Athena. Its distinctive blade-like design was unmistakably Coraxian, but something was wrong. The ship's usually sleek profile was marred by dark patches, and its engine signature was erratic. "Life signs?" Miller asked. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, their sensors officer, responded immediately. "Reading approximately 50,000, Captain. Mostly in cryostasis. Their life support systems are showing critical failures across multiple decks." "It's a colony ship," Chen realized aloud. "But the nearest Coraxian colony is 20 light-years in the opposite direction." Miller's tactical display pinged, highlighting the ship's registry. Her breath caught as she read the name. "The Vanguard of Dawn," she whispered, "under the command of Admiral Vexthor." The name sent a ripple through the bridge crew. Everyone knew who Vexthor was, the architect of the Jupiter colony massacre, where 3,000 civilians had died. Miller's hand unconsciously touched her scar again. "Captain." Chen stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The Meridian Boundary Agreement is clear. We're not obligated to respond to distress calls from their side. Given who's commanding that ship." Miller closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather's words from years ago. She'd been 16, angry about the war, spitting hate about the Coraxians. He'd taken her hands and said, "The true measure of humanity isn't how we treat our friends, Jesse. It's how we treat those who've wronged us when they're in need." "Open a channel," Miller ordered. "Captain," Chen protested, "these are the same people, whoa." "Open a channel, Commander." Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "That's an order." Chen complied, and the main view screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was Coraxian. Scaled skin, amber eyes, and the distinctive ridge crest of their military elite. But Admiral Vexthor looked nothing like the fearsome warrior from the propaganda broadcasts. His scales were dull, his eyes sunken. "This is Captain Jessica Miller of the UES Athena," she announced, keeping her voice steady. "We've received your distress call." "Captain Miller." Vexthor's translator conveyed his words with a slight delay. He seemed to struggle with the words. "We have children aboard. Whatever grievances lie between us, I beg you, do not let them pay for our sins." Miller looked around her bridge. At Hayes, who'd lost her husband at Jupiter Colony. At Rodriguez, whose sister had died in the Battle of Mars. At Chen, who still carried shrapnel in his leg from a Coraxian attack. Then she remembered her grandfather's words one last time. "Admiral Vexthor," she said, straightening in her chair. "Prepare for emergency assistance. The Athena is coming." Marine Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez gripped his pulse rifle tighter as the airlock cycled. Behind him, a full squad of Marines stood ready, their weapons pointed at the sealed door. The metallic taste of recycled air filled his mouth, mixing with the bitterness of memories he'd rather forget. "Stand down, Sergeant," Captain Miller ordered, stepping forward. "We're not here to start another war." "With all due respect, Captain," Rodriguez kept his rifle trained on the airlock. "The last time I was this close to a Caraxian, I was burying my sister." The airlock chimed its final sequence. Steam hissed through the seals as the pressure equalized. The door slid open with a hydraulic whine, revealing Admiral Vexthor's imposing figure. The Caraxian commander stood nearly 7 feet tall, his ceremonial armor dulled by what looked like carbon scoring. Behind him, 2 Caraxian officers flanked a young female of their species who carried what appeared to be a data core. "Welcome aboard the Athena," Miller said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent docking bay. "Though I admit, these aren't the circumstances I'd have expected for our next meeting." Vexthor's amber eyes fixed on Miller's scar, and his throat ridges flexed, a gesture Rodriguez recognized as shame. "The circumstances are humbling, Captain Miller. 5 years ago, I would have destroyed your ship on sight. Today, I must beg for your help." The young Caraxian female stepped forward, her scales shimmering with an iridescent quality that marked her youth. "Admiral," she spoke in perfect English, surprising everyone present. "The core's data is degrading. We need to transfer it immediately." Miller nodded to her science officer. "Dr. Turner, please assist with the data transfer. Commander Chen, have medical teams standing by for the first wave of evacuees." As the officers moved to comply, Vexthor's composure cracked. "Captain, there's something you need to know." He reached for a holographic projector on his belt, causing every Marine in the bay to tense. Rodriguez's finger tightened on his trigger. The projector activated, showing a 3-dimensional image of the vanguard of Dawn's hull. Sections of it seemed to be dissolving. "By the stars," Dr. Turner breathed, stepping closer to the hologram. "What's causing this?" "We don't know," the young Caraxian female answered, her voice trembling. "It began 3 days ago at our colony on Nexus VI. The surface structures started breaking down at a molecular level. We barely had time to evacuate 10,000 children to the cryo chambers before." She stopped, mandibles clicking in distress. "Before what?" Miller pressed. "Before the colony disappeared," Vexthor finished. "Completely. Down to the bedrock. We fled, but whatever it has followed us. Now it's consuming our ship, deck by deck. We've lost 30% of our hull integrity, and the cryo chambers won't last another 12 hours. Rodriguez watched Captain Miller's face as she processed this information. He'd served with her long enough to know she was already running scenarios, calculating risks. But there was something else in her expression. Recognition. "The Meridian Expanse," Miller said suddenly. "The missing ships. Everyone assumed it was pirates or natural phenomena. But..." She turned to Dr. Turner. "Emily, remember that classified report about the Carson's disappearance last year?" Turner's eyes widened. "The molecular decomposition patterns. They match." Vexthor's ridge crest flared in surprise. "You've encountered this before." "Not directly," Miller answered, "but 3 of our ships have vanished in this sector over the past year. Whatever this is, it's not just targeting corrections." A violent shudder ran through both ships, causing everyone to stumble. Rodriguez caught himself against a bulkhead, his combat training taking over as he scanned for threats. "Status report." Miller barked into her comm. "Captain," Hayes's voice crackled back, tight with urgency. "The Vanguard's hull breach is accelerating. We're reading massive structural failures in their cryo section. Time to critical failure, 8 hours, maximum." Miller locked eyes with Vexthor. In that moment, Rodriguez saw something he never expected, a Caraxian warrior afraid. not for himself, but for the thousands of children sleeping in those failing cryopods. "Admiral," Miller said, her voice carrying the weight of command, "let's save your people. Then we can figure out what the hell is trying to kill us all." Dr. Emily Turner pressed her hand against the observation window, watching in horrified fascination as the Vanguard's hull seemed to melt away like ice under a hot sun. Through her quantum microscope's feed, displayed on the tablet in her other hand, she could see the impossible happening at a molecular level. "It's like watching a swarm of pyrene," she muttered, adjusting the magnification. "Each nanomachine is barely larger than a virus, but they're coordinating somehow." Behind her, the Coraxian science officer, Kexley, made a clicking sound of distress. The young female had proven to be brilliant, already helping to interface their systems with the Athena's more advanced sensors. "The rate of consumption has increased by 47% in the last hour," she reported. "They're learning." A hollow boom echoed through the ship, followed by emergency klaxons. Red warning lights bathed the laboratory in an ominous glow. "Dr. Turner," Captain Miller's voice cut through the chaos on the comm. "Talk to me." Emily grabbed her tablet and ran to the main display. Kexley right behind her. "Captain, we've got a serious problem. These aren't just ordinary nanomachines. They're evolving. Each generation becomes more efficient at breaking down different materials. And now," she paused, double-checking her readings, "now they're starting to target organic matter." The silence that followed was deafening. "The cryo chambers," Vexthor's voice rumbled through the comm. "How long?" At the current rate of advancement, Emily's fingers flew over her calculations, less than 3 hours before they breached the outer shielding. "Once they're inside." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen to the frozen children if those chambers failed. The laboratory doors hissed open as Lieutenant Rodriguez entered, his combat armor now covered in a fine silvery dust. "Ma'am," he addressed Emily, "we've lost contact with Evacuation Team Charlie. They were in Section D7. "When?" "Show me," Emily demanded, pulling up the ship's schematics. Rodriguez pointed to a section of the Vanguard that was now showing critical structural failures. "The whole section just disappeared," he said, his voice hollow. "4 of my Marines and 6 Coraxian crew, gone in seconds." Kexley suddenly grabbed Emily's arm, her scaled fingers trembling. "Doctor, look at this." She pointed to her monitor, where a simulation was running. "The nanites aren't just consuming materials anymore. They're rebuilding something." Emily leaned in, her blood running cold as she watched the simulation play out. The nanomachines were taking the molecular components they'd harvested and reconstructing them into new forms. More of themselves, yes, but also something else. Something bigger. "Captain," Emily keyed her comm, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to evacuate everyone from the Vanguard now. Forget salvage protocols. These machines aren't just destroying the ship, they're using it as raw material to build something. And whatever they're making, it's growing." "Understood," Miller responded. "Admiral Vexthor, order your remaining crew to abandon ship immediately." "Dr. Turner, what about the Athena? Are we at risk?" Emily glanced at her readings again. "Our hull composition is different. Newer alloys the nanites haven't encountered yet, but they're adapting quickly. I estimate we have maybe 6 hours before they figure out how to eat through our defenses too." Another boom shook the ship, closer this time. The lights flickered. "Doctor," Kexley whispered, her amber eyes wide, "look at the children's vital signs." Emily rushed to the medical display. The readings from the cryo chambers showed elevated neural activity across the board, impossible for deeply frozen subjects. "The nanites," she breathed. "They're not just attacking the chamber's external systems. They're interfacing with the neural monitors somehow, almost like they're curious." Rodriguez stepped closer, his face grim. "Are you saying these things are conscious?" "I'm saying they're learning. And they've just discovered 10,000 new test subjects. Emily hit her comm again. Captain, we need a new plan. Now, because whatever these machines are, they're not just trying to destroy us anymore. They're trying to understand us. Kexley finished, her voice shaking. And they're using our children to do it. Dr. Emily Turner's laboratory had become a war room. Holographic displays showed the nanomachines' relentless advance, while scattered tablets displayed failed simulation after failed simulation. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, running on synthetic caffeine and determination. Another failure, Kexley announced, her scaled hands trembling as she input more data. Even your most advanced electromagnetic pulses barely slow them down. They're adapting faster than we can develop countermeasures. Emily stared at the blood sample under her quantum microscope. It was her own blood, the 47th sample she'd analyzed today. Something about it kept nagging at her mind, like a half-remembered dream. Doctor, Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his guard position. Admiral Vexthor reports the first cryo chamber is showing signs of breach. We've got maybe an hour before. A video call interrupted him, projecting from Emily's main console. It was her daughter, Katie, calling from Earth. Emily had missed their weekly science project check-in. Mom. Katie's excited face filled the screen. Look what happened to my rust experiment. The iron oxide totally changed when I added. Emily's eyes widened. Katie, what did you just say about rust? Oh, well, we were studying oxidation in class, and I remembered how you said human blood uses iron to carry oxygen. So I thought. Emily suddenly grabbed her tablet, fingers flying across the surface. Kexley, what's the primary difference between human and Coraxian cellular structure? The young Coraxian blinked her amber eyes. Several things, but most notably your iron-based blood versus our copper-based. That's it. Emily spun to her workstation, pulling up molecular diagrams. The nanites are breaking down matter by manipulating electron bonds, but they've never encountered iron-based organic compounds before. Our blood doesn't just carry oxygen. It creates a unique electromagnetic field at a cellular level. Rodriguez stepped closer, frowning. In English, Doc. The rust experiment, Emily explained, already synthesizing a new sample. Iron oxide doesn't just corrode. It changes the electromagnetic properties of the base metal. Our blood does something similar, but at a quantum level. It's why human bodies can adapt to so many different environments. We're the only known species whose cellular structure naturally generates quantum-stable electromagnetic fields. Kexley's ridge crest flared in excitement. And the nanites work by disrupting molecular bonds through electromagnetic manipulation, which means they can't properly scan or break down human tissue because our cellular structure naturally interferes with their primary method of decomposition. Emily finished triumphantly. The laboratory doors hissed open as Captain Miller and Admiral Vexthor entered. The Admiral's usual imposing presence was diminished by exhaustion and worry. "Tell me you have something," Miller demanded. Emily held up a vial of reddish liquid. "We can stop them. But there's a catch." She took a deep breath. "We need to expose living human tissue to the nanites directly. If I'm right, the quantum interference from our cellular structure will cascade through their network, disrupting their ability to coordinate and evolve." A heavy silence fell over the room. "You're talking about using human beings as a biological weapon," Vexthor rumbled, his translator barely capturing the complex emotions in his voice. "No," Emily corrected. "I'm talking about using humanity's unique biology as a shield. But whoever does this, the pain will be excruciating, and there's no guarantee of survival." Rodriguez stepped forward, already removing his armor. "I'll do it." "Marcus, no," Emily protested. "You don't. Those kids in those cryopods." He continued, stripping down to his base layer. "They're the same age my sister was. I couldn't save her from the corrections." He looked directly at Vexthor. "But maybe I can save them from this." The Admiral held Rodriguez's gaze for a long moment, then pressed his closed fist to his chest, a Coraxian gesture of deepest respect. How do we do this? Rodriguez asked, his voice steady despite his fear. Emily grabbed her medical kit. We're going to need more volunteers. And we need to work fast. Because once we start this, she looked at the simulation of cascading quantum interference patterns. Those nanites are going to realize what we're doing. And they're going to fight back. Captain Miller stepped forward, already rolling up her sleeve. Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget. The Athena's mess hall had never been designed to hold thousands of refugees, yet here they were. Coraxian children emerging from emergency cryo-transport, their scaled faces confused and frightened, while human crew members worked frantically to process them all. Lieutenant Anna Davidson hadn't held a child since her sister's funeral. Now she found herself cradling a small Coraxian girl, no more than 6 by Earth standards, who refused to let go of her uniform. "It's okay," she whispered, though she knew the translator could barely handle the emotional nuances. "You're safe now." The ship shuddered violently, causing several children to cry out in their clicking language. Through the mess hall's viewport, Anna could see the vanguard of dawn. Entire sections of the massive vessel were now transparent, like Swiss cheese made of starlight. Her comm unit crackled. "Davidson." Captain Miller's voice was strained. "Status report. 212 children processed in the last hour, Captain." But she looked at the hundreds still waiting. "We're running out of room. And supplies." "Make room," Miller ordered. "Those nanites just breached the primary cryo storage. We've got less than 30 minutes to evacuate the remaining children." Anna's throat tightened as she watched more emergency pods arriving through the airlocks. "Understood, Captain. But the life support systems are already at 147% capacity, I know." Miller's voice softened slightly. "Just keep them calm. Dr. Turner's team is ready to begin the countermeasure." The comm clicked off. The Coraxian girl in Anna's arms touched her face gently, scaled fingers tracing a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Why you help?" the child asked in broken English. "We enemy." Before Anna could answer, the mess hall doors opened. Rodriguez stepped through, accompanied by 5 other volunteers. Their skin was pale, and they all moved with the careful steps of people in tremendous pain. The nanite exposure had begun. "Anna," Rodriguez managed through gritted teeth, "need your help. The kids, they need to see this isn't just about survival." Understanding dawned. Anna set down her small charge and grabbed her tablet, quickly accessing the ship's entertainment database. "Hey kids," she called out, letting the translator broadcast in Coraxian. "Who wants to learn an Earth game?" The response was immediate. Curious ridge crests raised throughout the room as Anna projected a simple hologram in the center of the mess hall. "It's called Duck, Duck, Goose," she explained, demonstrating the movements despite the growing chaos around them. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, but the children were too engrossed in learning the game to notice. Rodriguez sat heavily in a chair, sweat beading on his forehead. The nanites in his bloodstream were causing visible traces of silver to course through his veins. But he smiled as the first group of children began running in a circle, mixing Coraxian clicking with English words. "Davidson." Dr. Turner's voice cut through the comm. "The quantum cascade is working, but it's not spreading fast enough. We need more surface area contact." The children. "No," Rodriguez interrupted, standing despite the obvious agony. "We're not exposing them. Find another way." Anna looked around the room. At the playing children, at her suffering colleagues, at the disintegrating ship outside. An idea struck her. "The environmental systems," she said quickly into her comm. "We can use the air recyclers to distribute a diffused version of our blood into the air supply. It won't be as effective as direct contact, but with this many people in one space, the concentration might be enough." Turner finished. "But the volunteers' blood alone won't be sufficient. We'd need. Use mine," Anna said, already rolling up her sleeve. "Use all of us. Everyone who can." Throughout the mess hall, Human crew members began stepping forward. Many had lost family in the war. All of them had reasons to hate, yet here they were literally offering their blood to save the children of their former enemies. The small correction girl tugged at Anna's uniform again. "Why?" she repeated. Anna smiled through her tears, preparing for the medical team's arrival. "Because this is who we are. This is what humans do." Outside, the vanguard of dawn continued to dissolve. But inside the Athena's crowded mess hall, something else was being built, something far stronger than nanites could ever destroy. Chief Engineer Jack Reynolds stared at the shuttle's modified engine core, its usual blue glow now tinged with the silver shimmer of his own nanite-infected blood. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but there wasn't time for weakness. Not now. The biological EMP will only work if we detonate it inside the primary nanite mass, he explained, his voice rough. The ship's computer displayed a holographic representation of their target, a swirling silver cloud that had once been the Vanguard's engineering section. Missed that, and we've wasted our only shot. Admiral Vexthor examined the shuttle's modifications with an engineer's eye. Your targeting systems won't function. The nanites will corrupt any automated guidance the moment we get close, which is why I'm flying it in manually, Reynolds replied, running final diagnostics. One-way trip. No, the correction's voice was firm. We will fly it. Together. Reynolds turned to argue but stopped when he saw Vexthor's expression. The Admiral's usual military bearing had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. My children are in those cryopods, Vexthor said quietly. The youngest ones. I ordered the evacuation of our colony, sent them ahead, while I stayed to save more. I thought. His translator crackled with emotion. I thought I was being a hero. Instead, I nearly condemned them to death. The ship's comm system activated. Jack. Captain Miller's voice. The nanites have adapted again. They're beginning to penetrate our outer hull. Whatever you're going to do. Understood, Captain. Reynolds started the shuttle's pre-launch sequence. Admiral, if you're coming, we need to move now. They boarded quickly, Reynolds at the pilot's controls, Vexthor handling engineering. The shuttle's small cabin was cramped for the correction's large frame, but he made no complaint. Launch control, this is Shuttle Echo 7, Reynolds called. Request emergency departure. Echo 7, you are cleared, Miller responded. And Jack, give them hell. The shuttle rocketed out of the Athena's bay, immediately buffeted by waves of quantum distortion from the nanite cloud. Reynolds' hands flew over the controls, compensating manually as their electronic systems began to fail. Engineering systems failing, Vexthor reported. Reactor containment at 60% and dropping. The nanites are attacking faster than predicted. Reynolds grunted, wrestling with the controls. They're learning from our blood samples, trying to adapt. His vision blurred momentarily. Whether from pain or the nanite's effect on his optic nerves, he couldn't tell. How long until total system failure? 3 minutes. Maybe less. Vexthor moved to the co-pilot's seat. Allow me. No offense, Admiral, but I don't think. I was a fighter pilot before I was an admiral, Vexthor interrupted. And my species evolved for higher G-forces than yours. You handle the weapon systems. I'll get us to the target. Reynolds hesitated for a split second, then nodded. They switched positions just as another wave of distortion hit, nearly sending them into a spin. The nanite cloud loomed ahead, a silver maelstrom of microscopic destruction. At its heart, Reynolds could see flashes of what looked like lightning. The machines communicating, coordinating, evolving. 1 minute to critical failure, he announced, watching their systems crash one by one. Admiral, I see it. Vexthor's hands danced across the controls with surprising grace. The corridor will only be open for seconds. When I give the word, the shuttle plunged into the cloud. Silver motes spattered across their viewport like rain, eating through the transparent metal. Warning klaxons blared as hull integrity dropped. Now, Vex Thor roared. Reynolds slammed his hand down on the detonator. Nothing happened. Manual override required. The computer announced calmly. Physical connection needed for activation. Reynolds and Vex Thor looked at each other. Without a word, they both understood. Together, they reached for the exposed core, their nanite-infected blood mingling as they made contact with the detonator. The last thing Reynolds saw was a flash of pure white light, and in that moment, he swore he heard Vex Thor laughing. Not the laugh of a warrior or an admiral, but of a father who knew his children would live. The biological EMP burst outward like a newborn star. The Athena's medical bay was dead silent except for the rhythmic beeping of life support systems. Dr. Emily Turner stared through the quarantine field at two figures, one human, one Corexian, floating in regeneration tanks. Impossible, she muttered, checking the readings again. They should be dead. The energy release alone. Yet they live, Captain Miller said softly, stepping up beside her. How? Emily pointed to the molecular scan results. The nanites in their bloodstreams. They changed at the last second. Instead of trying to destroy organic matter, they began protecting it. It's like they learned from our cellular structure and adapted to preserve rather than destroy. The ship's comm system crackled. Captain, Lieutenant Davidson's voice came through. You need to see this. The children. Something's happening. Miller and Emily rushed to the mess hall, now serving as an improvised refugee center. They found Davidson standing among the Coraxian children, all of whom were staring at their hands in wonder. Their wounds are healing, Davidson explained, pointing to where cuts and scrapes from the evacuation were visibly closing. All of them. And look at this. She held up her own arm, where a deep gash from the rescue operation was knitting itself closed. Emily quickly scanned the nearest child. The nanites that survived the EMP. They're not just repairing damage. They're improving cellular regeneration. Somehow, the combination of human blood and Coraxian physiology created something entirely new. A cure? Miller asked. More than that, Emily replied, her voice filled with awe. An evolution. A weak voice came from behind them. Evolution was always the point. They turned to find Rodriguez in a wheelchair, his skin still showing traces of silver, but his eyes clear. When I was connected to them, at the end, I saw what they were. Not weapons, tools, left by someone, something, to help species evolve. But they had to learn what evolution meant first. Through us, Davidson realized. Through seeing different species working together instead of fighting. The medical bay's emergency channel suddenly activated. Dr. Turner. They're waking up. Everyone rushed back to medical, arriving just as Reynolds and Vex Thor began to regain consciousness in their tanks. The regeneration fluid drained away as medical staff helped them out. My children, were Vex Thor's first words. Are they? Safe, Miller assured him. All of them. Thanks to you both. Reynolds coughed, looking at his hands where silver traces still swirled under his skin. Did we stop them? You did more than stop them, Emily said, showing them the scans. You changed them, changed us all. Over the next hour, as both patients regained their strength, Emily explained what had happened. The nanites hadn't been destroyed by the EMP. They'd been transformed by it, merged with the unique properties of human and Coraxian biology to create something unprecedented. So what happens now? Rodriguez asked from his wheelchair. To all of us with these improvements. That, Miller said, might be the most important question of all. She turned to Vex Thor. Admiral, your people have lost their colony. These children will need a home. Vex Thor's ridge crest raised in surprise as he understood her implication. You would offer shelter. After everything. Not just shelter, Miller replied. Partnership. Whatever these nanites were meant to do, they chose to save us both. Maybe it's time we learned from their example. Davidson laughed suddenly. drawing everyone's attention. "Sorry," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "It's just, my sister died fighting the corrections, and now her death helped save their children." She would have loved the irony of that. Vexthor moved to her wheelchair, dropping to one knee, a gesture that made his honor guard gasp. "Your sister's sacrifice will be remembered in our histories," he said solemnly, "as will all of yours." Reynolds, still shaky on his feet, raised his hand where silver swirled beneath the skin. "To evolution," he said simply. One by one, others raised their hands, human and Correxian alike, showing the same silver patterns. Not marks of infection now, but badges of change, of hope, of understanding, finally achieved. 1 month later, the Athena's observation deck hosted a ceremony unlike any in human or Correxian history. The massive viewport showed Earth hanging like a blue jewel in the darkness, while representatives from both species gathered to sign what the media was already calling the Unity Accords. Captain Jessica Miller stood at the podium, her dress uniform adorned with both Earth Force insignia and, controversially, a Correxian honor mark. The silver traces beneath her skin caught the light as she raised her hands for silence. 3 weeks ago, she began, I received a message from Earth Command asking how we could trust the corrections after everything that happened in the war. She paused, looking at the assembled crowd. I sent them this. The holographic projector activated, showing the mess hall of the Athena. Human crew members and Correxian children played together, their laughter transcending the need for translators. In one corner, Lieutenant Davidson taught a group of young Corrections to play chess. In another, Rodriguez, still in his wheelchair, demonstrated Earth martial arts movements to fascinated youngsters. This is who we are, Miller continued. Not what we were, not what we fought against, but what we can become together. Admiral Vexthor stepped forward, his massive frame somehow less intimidating now. The silver patterns under his scales had formed intricate designs, marking him as one of the changed, those who had survived direct nanite exposure. My people have a saying, he rumbled, his translator perfectly conveying the emotion in his voice. Victory is not in surviving the battle, but in learning from it. We learned more in 1 day aboard the Athena than in 5 years of war. Dr. Emily Turner stood next, her lab coat bearing both Earth Science Division and Correxian Research Guild patches. The nanite integration continues to evolve, she reported. Those of us who were directly exposed show increased healing capabilities, enhanced neural connectivity, and she smiled, the ability to communicate without translators. The changed can now speak both languages natively, as if we had known them from birth. But more importantly, Chief Engineer Reynolds added from his position near the viewport, we understand each other. Not just words. Everything. The nanites don't just translate language. They translate experience. Every changed human knows what it feels like to bask in the double suns of Corax. Every changed Correction knows the feel of earth rain on their skin. Which brings us to today, Miller resumed. The Unity Accords aren't just a peace treaty. They're a blueprint for our future. The first joint human Correction colony will begin construction next month. The changed will serve as bridges between our peoples, teaching both species how to understand each other. She gestured to where the Correxian children sat, now wearing clothes that blended both cultural styles. And these children will be our first true joint citizens, raised with the knowledge of both worlds. The small Correxian girl who had first bonded with Davidson stood up, walking to the podium. Without a translator, she spoke in perfect English. On behalf of the children of the Vanguard, we pledge to honor the sacrifice that saved us. To remember that strength isn't in weapons, but in hearts willing to help even those who were once enemies. Rodriguez wheeled forward, presenting her with a small box. Inside was a medal, a new decoration created specifically for this moment. Half Earth design, half Correxian, showing 2 hands clasped in unity. The Athena Medal, Miller announced, to be awarded to those who bridge our differences and find strength in unity. And its first recipients, She smiled at her crew. Are the children who taught us all how to see with new eyes. As the ceremony concluded and the accords were signed, Miller found herself at the viewport with Vexthor, watching Earth's slow rotation. Think they're ready for us down there? She asked quietly. They will learn, he replied, as we did. He touched the silver patterns on his arm. After all, evolution is a process, not a destination. Miller nodded, watching as human and correction crews mingled freely, sharing stories and hopes for the future. The nanites might have forced them to understand each other, but what they chose to do with that understanding, that was purely their own choice, and they chose to become better together.